Okay. So going back to the basics, we'll be looking at today at 2D and 3D. And when we speak of 3D virtual worlds, when we speak of virtual reality, immediately, people start thinking in terms of 3D. It doesn't make too much sense to speak of 2D in the context of virtual reality. Well, that's, the tradition. And we're going to see whether it makes sense to talk about 2D even in the context of virtual reality. Okay. But before going even to that place, let's look at, basic things that I want to touch upon. I think this sort of questions was already being asked like decades before by very thoughtful designers and information architects, and the one person I'm very fond of is Edward Dufty, and he spent quite a lot of time talking about data visualization and 3D data visualization. And you might have seen that there are a lot of VR applications that are looking into 3D data visualization because of the opportunities that virtual reality technologies, platform devices, interfaces offer, for this kind of thing. But with 3D representations of data, there are often fundamental blocks. One of them is that normally the purpose of a data visualization is to allow someone to comprehend the data very quickly just at a glance. Okay, so by looking at a graph, even a 2D graph, you can see interrelationships between the variables. You can see the trend lines very easily. But as soon as you try to translate these 2D visualizations into 3D, what you will find is that you will hit simple problems, obvious problems, like occlusion. I wish, people doing 3D visualization would look at simple things like that instead of, trying to force and make, something that does not work really work. So like in this graph, for example, it's a 3D graph. We can immediately see that, if you look at the data in the background here, you can see that it's hidden and we just can't see them. So that's a basic thing. Well, you can imagine this graph to be like in a 3D world, and you would walk around in order to see all the various and get perspectives from all kinds of angles. But then you have to, move your camera, or you have to walk around. So all these tasks have a cost. And the purpose of a great data visualization is, as I said, is just by looking at a glance, you get a sense of as much as possible of what the data is showing. And so it gets, this problem is not like simple, and the solution is not to simply translate linearly, 2D data representations into 3D. Okay. And one of the other, current popular myth is that 3D is an evolution of 2D. That is, you've got things that is done in 2D, and you want to improve things by making them evolve into 3D. Well, the argument can be made that actually we lived in a 3D world originally, and people who started making sketches, like our ancestors making drawings on the walls of caves, they were already trying to translate like an external physical world outside to a representation that would be accessible very quickly and even shareable, and that could be used to capture events and things like that. And then, as we evolved as a civilization or as a being, we started even trying to represent mental events and things like that on a 2D plane. And these processes have been quite useful. And of course, I mean, there are things like an argument can be made that when you have a 3D environment, it might actually be easier to represent motion, for example. It's easier to represent. But is that true? Is that true that you can actually represent motion and dynamic stuffs better in a 3D world? More than 2D, we don't know. I mean, that's an area that we can explore. But we can already see that even in a 2D medium, we can have, even if we have like a static image or painting, if you have an artist looking at this, they would be able to talk about, gesture lines or lines that show motion, even though, it's just a static, static string, I would say, static line or curve on a 2D page, okay? And of course we have 2D animation, but then you have to introduce the time factor in, so you need to watch it over time. So you can have a sense of motion just by looking at a static image, or like this is like a lady dancing, for example, or you can actually have images that you would play frame by frame, but you need to add the dimension of time. Then we could see the horse galloping. Okay. Then the next question comes is, how easy it would be to make those drawings, on a 2D plane. So if we go into a 3D environment, and you might have seen that one of the most popular applications in the 3D realm is the tilt brush application. And you have artists, having to wear the goggles and hold the user interface to track their hand gestures, and in order to make a drawing. Okay, so the one thing that you need to understand with trying to create content, even artistic content, is that on one side you have the creator of that content, but you also have somebody that's going to receive that content, the reader, the viewer. And currently with, just drawing on paper, the reader and the content creator are both sharing the same space. And it's also very, it feels free, okay? You're not tethered to a device, and so in this case, if you have a viewer who wants to experience what this person is drawing, of course you can look at the product on a 2D screen that's projecting what the artist is doing, but you can also have the viewer get immersed in the 3D world with the artist, so that both of them can see, what's being produced. And so that's kind of interesting. Okay, so there are opportunities there for further design and further exploration. But as I said, wearing these things and getting tethered, it's kind of interesting, because we have this technology that is supposed to be liberating us and freeing us, but at the same time, it actually takes us out of the real world. So in a way, we are becoming blind to the real world, and then as we move into, the virtual realm in order to do what we want to do. So just wearing those devices kind of isolates us, in a quite deep way. So on the more practical front, how many artists would actually prefer to, draw inside an immersive 3D world? Or would they still stick to their pencils and papers for sketching, etc.? So that's something that we need to pay attention and watch for. So this sketch was made in using tilt brush, and you can, just looking at it already see, get a feel of the drawing. But it's quite difficult to produce this, in a 3D space without force feedback and without, being able to rest your hand. If someone would do like a task load evaluation between, two conditions, one where an artist is actually drawing in a 3D space freely, and one where an artist is actually drawing the same object on a 2D sheet of paper, I think we'll end up with, very obvious results. So those are the kind of questions. I mean, it's true that there are lots of opportunities to further explore the 3D drawing realm, but it's important to look at it from this broad perspective, okay? Because we really want to focus on what is the return on investment, and the investment, it's not just the cost of devices, it's the user interface, subjective workload that someone perceives when they are using, the devices, and how much that is liberating, or whether it's limiting, or whether we are trying to force something that's not happening naturally. So those are the kind of things that I wanted to talk about when considering 2D as opposed to 3D, or 2D as a lesser medium than 3D. So the more we become familiar with those issues, the more thoughtful we can we can be when designing 3D spaces. But then there are definitely advantages for using 3D instead of 2D, and I think what we'll do is in part 4 of this series, I will try to describe why I think what's the value added when we start designing for 3D, and how to design for that space. And that will be the next section, the next part of this conversation / talk. Alright, thanks for your attention.